two men wake up chained to rusty pipes in a dungeon. Who put them there, and how are they going to escape? It had been a long time since I'd watched the original entry in the Saw franchise, and I was pleasantly surprised how well it held up. While there are 10 mainline entries, it is hard to keep straight what happens in which movie. For example, I did not remember that Danny Glover was in this series at all, and I kept waiting for Donnie Wahlberg to show up, and he never did. Apparently he's in the second film. I also didn't realize that both Miles and Ben from Lost were in Saw just a year or so before their big break on one of the most watched TV shows of the 2000s. The acting in Saw leaves a lot to be desired. Cary Elwes is perfect as Wesley in The Princess Bride, but he just did not do a great job of pulling off the terror and pain needed for his role as Dr. Lawrence Gordon in Saw. I laughed so hard when Elwes' character is introduced. He wakes up in a dungeon at the beginning of the movie. The other man who wakes up in the room across from him says, "Who are you?" And Elwes' character replies, "I'm Lawrence Gordon. I'm a doctor." Can you imagine anyone else doing this? "I'm John Smith. I work at Lowe's." The story, though, rock solid. Everything is intertwined and ties up nicely. Things that seem meaningless at first come back around eventually. There are a lot of clues that are hidden in the background, or there are things that look like maybe they're mess-ups that in the end were done on purpose. Now, some of these things you're not going to notice, but if you read about the movie after, you're going to appreciate the attention to detail that James Wan and Leigh Whannell put into everything. Now, of course, as the series goes on, the plot gets impossible to follow, so it was a breath of fresh air to watch this first movie without the baggage of the writers trying to make all of the movies tie together and make sense. Some famous guy whose name I can't remember has once said, "Try to recreate your favorite artist's art. The difference between what they did and what you did trying to recreate their art is your style. Lean into it." Wan and Whannell were very clearly trying to capture the dark tone of David Fincher's Seven, and they did a pretty decent job. But Saw is just different enough to really kind of be its own thing. Many people give the original Saw, along with Eli Roth's Hostel, credit for starting the torture porn genre of horror movies. So I was very shocked that this first movie isn't super over-the-top gory. Now sure, it is disturbing and there are some horrific things that happen, but a lot of the gnarliest stuff happens off-screen where your imagination fills in the details. Now, Saw was made with a tiny budget and the crew couldn't even afford to shoot outdoors, so the entire movie takes place inside, and I didn't notice that until I read about the movie after. I imagine that most of the budget was spent on the dungeon set piece, where most of the movie takes place, and that set was awesome, and it has become iconic. And the movie's first act is just incredible. It's as much a mystery as it is a horror film, and it keeps the audience guessing. Who are these two men? How did they get here? What are the clues that are going to help them to escape? Now, I don't know if Saw invented the real-life escape rooms that have been popping up all over the country for the past decade or so, but watching this in 2023, I thought, how cool would it be to have a Saw-themed escape room? Now, a classic horror film needs a killer premise, an awesome bad guy, a great score, and it must offer some originality not seen before in the genre. Saw has all of this. It launched an entire genre, created one of the most successful horror franchises of all time. It also catapulted the careers of the writer and director. They went on to work on Insidious and The Invisible Man and Fast and the Furious and The Conjuring and Aquaman, as well as many other movies and shows. And while the series ends up getting convoluted and a bit too over-the-top gross and torture-y, this first entry stands alone. It holds up, and it remains one of the best horror films of the 2000s. Listening to mini cassette tapes, puppets on tricycles, using a hacksaw, bad acting, chain link fences and fog, waking up with this thing on your head,